G'day mate, 40 here. Had a lovely afternoon at Clovelly Beach on Sydney's eastern suburbs. And if you were to look at the grand sweep of my body of thought, right, you would notice a profound change over the past 8 years towards more evolutionary explanations for how the world works. So, prior to 2012, I think I relied on Dennis Prager's presentation of ethical monotheism, my rudimentary understanding of Judaism, to largely inform my understanding about how the world worked. But after reading a lot of Steve Saylor and Kevin MacDonald and the biological right wing, I've increasingly moved towards evolutionary explanations for how the world works. And I think we were evolutionarily designed to eat meat. Now, I can't do it. 56 years of being a vegetarian, I'm not going to change that overnight. It wouldn't be very easy. But I had such a profound experience of the life-changing potential of meat. About 18 months ago, I started taking beef organ capsules. And about a year prior to that, it was reading Nathan Kofnas. He wrote a couple of articles, academic papers on the dangers of the vegetarian diet, how raising your kids vegetarian makes them less popular than child molesters. Maybe that's an exaggeration, maybe it was just homosexuals. And I got to meet Nathan Kofnas, and he talked about all the health problems he had in his early 20s when he went vegan, and how all those health problems went away when he started eating steak again. And he grew an inch at age 27 after he started eating steak every day. And I was intellectually convinced by Nathan Kofnas on the topic of vegetarianism, just as I was intellectually convinced by Nathan Kofnas on his critique of Kevin MacDonald's culture of critique. Like, I find Nathan Kofnas an impressive scholar. He's got a very tight Twitter game. And I just got my life back at age 55. And I just started popping 6 beef organ capsules every day. And I got a whole new level of vitality. And I realized that I'd had 55 years of poor health because of the crazy vegetarian diet I was raised with. So I was raised a Seventh-day Adventist. Seventh-day Adventists believe in quote-unquote health reform. Yeah, Jordan Peterson only took in half of Kofnas' input. So Kofnas would definitely not recommend not eating vegetables, not eating salad, stuff like that. So the Seventh-day Adventist message of health reform was that we need to go back to the Garden of Eden, where apparently there wasn't meat and fish consumed. And so health reform, Seventh-day Adventist means vegetarian. And when Seventh-day Adventists and Seventh-day Adventist influenced people talk about being health conscious, in significant part they mean being vegetarian. So I had someone close to me ask, you seem so health conscious at times and other times not at all. What's going on? This is as I'm piling Nutella with peanut butter on top of my crackers for lunch. What do I know about the Kellogg cereal family and their Seventh-day Adventist eugenics wheat diet? I heard a lot about the Kellogg's growing up. I like the novel The Road to Wellville. A very funny novel about Battle Creek, Michigan, and the Kellogg family and the whole health reform message. So overall, I look back on my Seventh-day Adventist quote-unquote healthy upbringing as cranks, all right? My father tried to raise us with the ideal that we should try to get 80% of our calories from carbohydrates, and only 10% from fat and 10% from protein. Just like absolute insane. You could have crossed over to meat eating but chose not to. Maybe you like being difficult in polite company. That going vegetarian would seem quite common among the LA set. Well, you say I could have, and yes, theoretically I could have. You could theoretically learn scuba diving. Or I don't know what your phobias are, right? But if you don't eat meat for the first 20, 30 years of life, very, very difficult to change over. Some people are able to do it without much problem. Other people find it very difficult. Like, I don't know what your weak points are. I don't know where you're vulnerable. Like, maybe you would feel very ill at ease being half a mile out to sea. All right, I feel very comfortable swimming half a mile out to sea, just floating there and then swimming back. Now, other people would be terrified in that situation. Some people love scuba diving. Other people would be absolutely terrified, going underwater with scuba equipment. Some people are very smooth at approaching women. Other people are absolutely terrified about approaching women. Now, the terminally shy guy who becomes incredibly tongue-tied when faced with the prospect of approaching women, could he approach women? Yes, he could. But it would be 100 times more difficult for him than it would be for me. So, by life experience, we get shaped in different directions. I never consciously chose to stay a vegetarian. It was just an ingrained habit, like many other habits. Now, I did learn to drink coffee, so maybe once every few months I'll have a cup of coffee, and that wasn't too difficult. I did learn to swear, did learn to go to movies, I did convert to another religion. So many things I changed, some things I didn't. We all have ingrained habits and proclivities and phobias and fears, so that what is terribly difficult for one person is nothing for another. So, just reflecting on how the health-conscious attitude that I was raised with, how anti-healthy it was, how insane it was, and how devastating it was. I mean, Kofnes makes some pretty strong points about how it retards mental development, leads to all sorts of health problems and social problems. It's a huge handicap when you raise your kids as vegetarian. Fair enough, I merely object to the blame your parents rhetoric. There's no blame here. Like, do I blame myself for being a porn addict? No, I don't blame myself. I didn't choose to be a porn addict. I didn't choose to be a love addict. I didn't choose to be a sex addict. I didn't choose to be a debtor or an under-earner or whatever my other emotional compulsions are. My dad did not choose to crush my life by raising me with a vegetarian diet. My dad did the very best he could with the tools he had at his disposal. And guess what? I did the best I could. If I'd known at age 12, 15, 18, 21, 25, 30, 37, 46, 52, that I could get my life back by eating meat, don't you think I would have absolutely forced myself to eat meat? I would have. Would you have been more or less addicted to porn on a meat-based diet? Well, I think a lot of addictions, at least in my experience of addiction, are substantially situation dependent. So if my life is going well, right, I'm much less vulnerable to my destructive emotional compulsions. So I like the definition of addiction as when you feel compelled to participate in your own destruction. So when my life is thriving, I rarely feel compelled to participate in my own destruction. So when you combine poor health and the isolation, low social status, diminished opportunities that go along with it, then you're placing someone in a much more vulnerable position where they're going to reach out for a quick fix for their feelings of failure and frustration. So yeah, whether you're in thriving health or poor health, whether you're thriving socially or struggling socially, if you're thriving economically or struggling economically, that will probably play a role for many people in how vulnerable they become to addictions or destructive compulsions. So it's kind of funny to think back. It seems to me, given the information I know at this time, how much better my life would have been if I had not been raised health conscious. There's so many things that if we consciously strive for them, we're much worse off. All right? So, like, take addiction with its medical model, that we have a disease. All right? It's an insane sounding model for addiction, that like alcoholism is a disease, that overeating is a disease. It makes absolutely no rational sense. But this irrational model seems to work for some people. So there are all sorts of things in life that just seem to work that upon examination don't work. Like the happiest marriages seem to be where people have a dramatic, exaggerated overestimation of their own spouse's worth and value and beauty. Right? They're not realistic about their spouse. In my experience, in my conversations of the best marriages, man, these pigeons don't fear me. They don't. What's that term that 4chan uses? Keeping my powers hidden. Trying to keep my powers hidden from these pigeons. I heard one explanation of religion, that if you think you understand your religion, you're not religious. I think there's something to that. If you think you understand your spirituality, you're not spiritual. Right? There are some mysteries that are only accessible to those in the dance and are inaccessible to those who demand 100% rational inquiry. Like if we knew what our friends were thinking, we wouldn't have any friends. I had some brilliant notes jotted down, but this is where I love to go swimming there. In that Clavelli Reservoir, you find the groypers.
The party comes back in.
Okay, I'll play a little Stephen Kotkin. So what do you need in 12 steps is a higher power of your misunderstanding. Yes. I think, or a humility that it's beyond your understanding. I think that helps some people. Right? I think irrational, non-rational, even false beliefs frequently help people. Like I've always despised the medical model for addiction. That we're not bad people getting better, we're sick people getting well. I always despised that, always thought it was irrational. It just works for a lot of people, even though it makes absolutely no sense. I've been listening to a lot of Harvey Asher, like the 12-step Sexaholics Anonymous dude. And he talks about how prayer can block you from God. Our rationality can block you from God. Like you might think that you might think you have a rational understanding of things. But if you can explain the spiritual process or your religious process, maybe you're not really spiritual or religious. What do I think about seed oils? I don't have any opinion on seed oils. Wow, AA doesn't work perfectly, but it works remarkably. Yeah, I like that. But I mean, I'd say the same thing for a ton of other things. This isn't a pro 12-step stream, but a lot of relationships, right? For instance, there are a lot of like plain blokes out there. Blokes just unimpressive when you look at them, when you interact with them, but they're just fair dinkum. They're just honest. They're honest to God. They're unpretentious. They're reliable. And so on the face of it, they're not impressive, and you wonder, like, why is my sister with this man? Why is my friend marrying this guy? He doesn't seem that impressive. But there's just something about him that works, or works for your sister. And so too with religion, right? You can think there's a ton of like irrational, stupid, immoral, unethical, homophobic religion. It just seems to work for people. And so that just makes me kind of humble. Because I've always been a guy who wants to figure things out. Now, you're probably wondering, 40, what does Stephen Kotkin have to say about the Ukraine situation?
The party comes back in when it decides that, hey, these entrepreneurial people they're onto something. Let's take away their businesses. And so you have massive expropriation by the party of the private sector. This is the next stage of the process. And they have land which they control. They don't actually own it. The state owns it, but they control it locally. And they sell that land to private entrepreneurs who then build factories or build warehouses or whatever it might be. But here's another part that the party steals credit for that it doesn't deserve. Hong Kong. People ask me all the time, how come Gorbachev didn't do it China? Well, first, they didn't have enough Chinese. Secondly, that would be a big barrier. Secondly, he had no Hong Kong, which is to say, a private entrepot, a financial system with the rule of law that made decisions, investment decisions, based upon economic, not political criteria. And so
I think that's huge, right? Why didn't Gorbachev do a Chinese economic miracle? One, he didn't have Chinese, right? DNA is incredibly important if you want to build some type of prosperous society. Number two, he didn't have the institutions. Like Hong Kong had institutions that they inherited from the British that allowed the economy to thrive. Gorbachev didn't have that, didn't have the DNA, didn't have the institutions.
It came in from Taiwan and Japan, as well as from Hong Kong, was funneled through Hong Kong investment entities, which invested in the special economic zones and tapped into this entrepreneurialism that flourished, and then tapped into the corrupt party officials that expropriated this. And so you have a picture where the party doesn't do this, the society does it, as the general said. And then Hong Kong does most of it. And then the Japanese and Taiwanese supply a lot of the capital and the technology.
John Smith says there's a massive meth epidemic right now in Australia. He's going to pray that I stay on the straight and narrow. Thanks. Thanks, John. I really appreciate it. Like, I have a lot of vulnerabilities, but I don't think that meth is one of them. Leah Greenfield has gone silent since May 2022. I haven't been in contact with her, so she was good about answering my emails, and I haven't been listening to her. So I do find her very interesting. So I'll have to check up on Leah Greenfield. I find it hard to believe it's because of Ukraine. So can you hear Stephen Kotkin here clearly? I mean, I think he's making some interesting points.
Japanese and Taiwanese supply a lot of the capital and the technology. By the way, technology transfer to China is written into the GATT and written into the WTO. It was a goal that we pursued. And then this becomes an across-the-board, bipartisan, across the aisle, bipartisan policy.
Oh, so there's a question, what do I think of seed oils? So I don't know much about health, but one thing I do think I know something about is how food affects me, and so I don't notice any deleterious effect from seed oil. So one thing I do notice is a deleterious effect of a high carbohydrate diet. Right? I don't function as well on that as I seem to function on the zone. Right? So I try to stay in the zone. Approximately 40% of my calories from carbs, 30% protein, 30% fat.
Yeah, but there was a huge lag in understanding what was going on.
Yeah, okay.
This is Niall Ferguson
the geopolitical
from the GoodFellows.
Let's just celebrate what happened.
Yeah.
The billion people escape horrible poverty. That should happen to India. That should happen to Africa. It was a.
This is John Cochrane, an economist at Stanford, and earlier was Niall Ferguson, Stephen Kotkin, and H.R. McMaster will also chime in.
It was the greatest increase in human welfare we've seen. Now,
yeah, seed oils aren't bad for you. It's just a heads up. It's an alt-right. Yeah, I noticed that the alt-right's all against seed oils, but I know nothing about it except that they don't have any immediate effect on me. So there we go. Oh, so this talk about China's economic revival and how it brought 1 billion Chinese out of poverty. I remember listening to my former UCLA economics professor, and we used to have hours of conversations outside of class, and he was an influence on me, and played a role in inspiring me to convert to Orthodox Judaism. So he was raised a secular Jew, became an Orthodox Jew. The alt-right's beliefs are based upon low information, low effort memes. Frequently, yes. Up until about 2015, the alt-right was primarily an intellectual movement. Then it became primarily a podcasting and video movement, and the IQ content, the IQ quality of its productions dramatically decreased. But back to Russell Roberts, Luke's Mango Madness plus beef organ pills. So I was telling a friend from Seventh-day Adventism about how my life had been changed by taking beef organ capsules. And he's in his 70s, he's still a vegetarian. And he said, can you honestly look at a cow in a paddock and think it's meant to be eaten? And I thought about it and I said, yeah, just like you can look at an attractive woman and think that she's meant to be bred with. So anyway, back to Russell Roberts, my econ professor at UCLA. So we'd have all these hours of conversation, and I heard him on a show on NPR about 6 years ago make the case for free trade, and half of his case was that it was good for Americans, that Americans like buying cheap Chinese goods. And the other half of his argument, he explicitly said, and just as important, free trade has helped bring 1 billion Chinese out of poverty. So he said half of his cases is good for Americans, half of his cases is good for Chinese. I was immediately struck. So the welfare of the Chinese is equally as important to you as the welfare of Americans? What kind of American citizen are you? If the welfare of another country, particularly one who's America's greatest geopolitical rival, has been for approximately 20 years, the welfare of this country is just as important to you as your own country, there's something about the economics profession that is detached from reality. For instance, when it talks about inputs, it treats all labor inputs the same, whether they're Japanese or Ashkenazi Jewish or West African or East Asian or South Asian. And of course, different peoples tend to have different gifts, but economists treat all these inputs as though they're the same. And yeah, 1 billion Chinese have not come out of poverty. So maybe 500 million have, but the average IQ of kids under 18 in rural China is basically 85. The country is still filled with pollution and problems. Yeah, you're still in poverty in Australia if you own a washing machine, refrigerator, a TV, and even a car. Yeah. So let's get a little more here from economist John Cochrane talking to Stephen Kotkin.
The biggest increase in human welfare we've seen. Now, yes, we'll get to the geopolitical. I want to ask, is this all over? Are we going back to North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela if the party takes over? But let's not immediately jump to how terrible it was that the U.S. let China escape $500 a person per year and get to $20,000 a year.
Look, international politics is sometimes zero sum. All right? Allowing the Chinese to become prosperous means that they are a more formidable rival. They make America less safe, right? In just basic bitch politics, basic bitch international power, all right? You're in far more dangerous position when your rival becomes rich, because then they can buy more guns and missiles and field a more formidable military and threaten you that way. Right? Power is power. Power coerces people into doing things they don't want to do. Why would you want your greatest rival to become increasingly powerful? So John Cochrane here is an economist, and he's got the blindness of many economists. Doesn't understand the geopolitical consequences, what he's talking about.
You're up 1 billion people.
There's no doubt that this is a miracle, and that millions and millions of lives got better as a result of this, and that Americans lost jobs and other Americans benefited from this. And then you could talk about Western Europe benefiting, you can talk about Japan benefiting, you can talk if you know what you're talking about, like John Cochrane, the inflation effects or non-inflation effects, as the case might be. You can talk about all sorts of important, really world historical developments. There's no doubt about that. I would just reduce the billion to the 600 to 800 million, because there's at least 600 million and probably 800 million Chinese who are not part of the world economy. They are not educated. They didn't finish high school. They can't get prescription glasses. They have no health care. This is part of what's known as...
Okay, Art Bell says sell the activator in Australia instead of hauling back 80 pounds of health gear to America. The activator weighs about 3 or 4 ounces. It's not a big deal. Now, I've had it for about 7 or 8 years, and it's absolutely changed my life. It saved me thousands of dollars in physical therapy bills. And the massage gun, man, the Bob and Brad massage gun is so reliable. It is so sturdy. Man, I've been exercising so much while I'm here, and I've been able to, do it by getting rid of the muscle tension through the massage gun.
They can't get prescription glasses. They have no health care. Dynamism that produces a better life for a lot of people. The question, though, is who did that and how did they do that? And the answer is, if it wasn't the party that did it all along the way, as I think there seems to be a consensus here, the party did something smart. It said, we're going to copy what Japan did. We're going to partner with the U.S.
Yeah, Art Bell, I'm not very entrepreneurial. A lot of people would do just what you talk about. You buy and sell, buy cheap, sell dear, right? A lot of people are really gifted that way. I'm just not entrepreneurial, and when I've attempted, entrepreneurship, I haven't particularly succeeded. But someone I know is gifted that way. So when she went to the Soviet Union in the 1970s, like, she sold her pair of jeans, for equivalent of hundreds of dollars. So a man has to know his limitations. Isn't that from the movie Cool Hand Luke? A man's got to know his limitations.
Something smart. It said, we're going to copy what Japan did. We're going to partner with the U.S. as our economic partner, sell it to the American middle class. They had to be capable of selling products that American consumers would buy. For example, Romania didn't have a lot of products that the American middle class was ready to buy, but the Chinese ended up having that.
But is this,
So that's on the Chinese people. That is credit to them for incredible success. Credit to Hong Kong, right? Credit to a lot of people. And you can argue that it happened much more quickly than we understood. And therefore, that was part of the naivete of assisting it. We didn't think that it would happen this quickly. In other words, that they would become a peer competitor within 2 generations or a generation and a half.
And would not otherwise.
We didn't
guys,
know that
being
the
wealthy
growth...
and productive is not a competitor. There's a geostrategic question we're going to get to, HR.
Okay, how naive is this economist, all right, John Cochrane at Stanford, thinking that wealthy and productive is not a competitor? The wealthier, more productive the Japanese were during World War II, the more of a competitor, the more of a threat they were. The wealthier, more productive Germany was in World War I, World War II, the more of a threat it was to its enemies. I mean, how insane is this basic bitch economist about the reality of international power and power struggles and geostrategic interests?
About competition, but simply being wealthy. The European Union is wealthy and productive, and that is not a competitor to the U.S. It's not a problem for us at all.
Right.
Yeah, right now it's not a problem, all right? In a different circumstance, it could indeed be a problem because there are no permanent friends, no permanent allies in international relations or in life, right? There are just interests. So, right, the Nazis pretty anti-Jewish, but they arranged for Jews to move to Palestine and made it really easy for them to move to Palestine. So they helped create the Jewish state because it was in their interest to do so.
It's now over. I think we were right that economic freedom and wealth would lead to a demand for political freedom, and China had to choose political freedom or clamp down. it's choosing clamp down. The party cannot stay in control of a free market economy.
That's correct.
Are we now headed to a disastrous decline?
Can I tell one story just to amplify, I think, what might be a turning point? And Stephen, I don't think the party understands that the Chinese people should get credit for lifting 600, 800 million people out of poverty. I think the party thinks they should get the credit.
Yes, sure.
So they want more, more communist party, right? And more control. In the last meeting that we had in the Great Hall of the People during Donald Trump's visit there was a day of meetings, and he was kind of tired or anybody, a little bit grumpy at the end of this last meeting. It was with Li Keqiang, and he couldn't understand, like, why am I meeting with Li Keqiang? Why am I meeting with the premier? I just met with Xi Jinping, but it was a formality, right? She's the nominal head of state. But Li Keqiang, he went into a long monologue, and in it he basically said, "We don't need you anymore." And he said, if you're lucky, you can transfer some more of your technology to us, but mainly you're going to sell us agricultural goods and energy, hydrocarbons. And that's going to be the role of the United States in the future. And of course, after which Donald Trump said, okay, thanks, stood up, and we just all laughed, right? So, but I thought that this meeting was important because, Li Keqiang.
Yeah, there are Australia First gropers all around. Australia's not polarized like America, right? In Australia, there's this widespread belief that the government is on your side. The government works for you, that the government assists in making life more fair. And so cultural issues, which are creating explosive divisions between Americans, operate at about 10% of the American level of intensity here in Australia. And Australians are not at each other's throats over abortion or gay rights or tranny rights or what's being taught in schools. So politics is much less intense here. There really aren't particularly significant differences between the two major parties in Australia, right? You're just talking about various permutations on the neoliberal consensus. So the Margaret Thatcher revolution, it's still the dominant outlook in both Australian politics and British politics. Some pufters bombed the Australian Christian Lobby's office when we had the gay marriage referendum. Yeah, so when I say that cultural issues operate at 10% the intensity of America, doesn't mean they operate at 0%. It's just much less. So I haven't witnessed or overheard or seen any intense political arguments since I've been here. Like, the Australian Prime Minister is boring. The current Australian governing party, the Labor Party, is boring. No one's particularly exercised and upset about it. John Smith says because most Aussies are apathetic. Most Aussies have other priorities aside from politics, such as going to the beach, having a drink, watching some sport, having a barbecue, having friends over, enjoying life. And that's not bad, right? As opposed to Charles Krauthammer and David Brooks and our foreign policy elite who want to invade the world and invite the world and meddle in other countries and tell them how they should be doing things. Between those two alternatives, much better to be obsessed with footy and going to the beach and having a barbie than being obsessed with invading the world. So back to H.R. McMaster, incredible story.
Was important because Li Keqiang, who was always seen as sort of Western leaning and everything, was not really Western leaning. He was basically saying that period of partnering with the United States not necessary anymore. We're on our own now, and we're going to eclipse the United States as the preponderant power economically.
And I think we'll look back and see that was
yes,
Xi Jinping.
Okay, John Smith, you say Australia's elite are demographically transforming society. So I looked at the Wikipedia entry, and Australia is still about an 80 to 85% Caucasian country. And then it's about a 15 to 18% Asian country. So Australia's thriving, and Sydney is filled with diversity, so there's less social cohesion, social trust in Sydney compared to other parts of Australia. and there's consequently less volunteering in Sydney compared to other parts of Australia. And yes, a diverse Sydney is a forecast of what's coming for Australia. But overall, the country's still working pretty well.
Yeah, I think we'll look back and see that was the Hoovers.
Yes,
Xi
yes.
Jinping.
Absolutely.
The notion that they actually had more or less achieved parity and that we were doomed to decline. And that Hoovers, I think, reached.
So I get into conversations about geopolitics with people, and when I point out that a rising China presents a threat to the United States and to the countries around it and to the world, they say, well, China's not like the United States. China doesn't have this long history of imperialism. Like, just because China gets stronger and stronger and builds up its military and its economy, that doesn't mean it's a threat to anybody else. And that's just nonsense. Right, just like that foreign minister that H.R. McMaster talked about. When he thought that China was in the catbird seat, he became cocky and said, you know, we don't need you guys anymore. You guys are nothing, right? People are transformed by having power, not just people but countries. Luke, have you watched Rambo 4? No, I don't think I have. He teams up with some Aussie mercenaries in Myanmar. Haven't watched that yet. But I have watched the Australian sitcom Fisk, which is quite amusing, mildly amusing. 50-something woman joins a law office that does wills. But it's on ABC iView. I'm enjoying that. And then I'm watching this series about this bald guy, a cable TV host, who moves to LA. Canada's wasps don't reproduce. 500,000 immigrants. Europeans might be excluded. Well, why aren't they reproducing? Are they one of those species who doesn't breed in captivity? Right? We need some philosopher king to unite the world's Anglo-Saxon tribes. And if King Charles isn't up to the task, maybe this convert to Orthodox Judaism needs to become the philosopher king that the Anglo-Saxon tribes need to unite them around, you know, a common message, so that WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, can regain their former preeminent position in the world and start operating with due diligence with regard to their own best interests. Maybe a convert to Judaism needs to lead them.
Hoovers, I think, reached a climax in 2020 when they thought that the pandemic had exposed us as completely deficient, and their superior zero COVID policy was going to be the key to success. And here we are, fast forward a couple of years, and they're trapped in a policy that has become so closely identified with Xi Jinping himself that it can't actually end it. That means the economy, to go back to John's question, is in a trap that it can't get out of. Consumption is way down because it's pretty hard to have dynamic consumption if you're being locked down every other.
Yes, Australians do have water sprinklers, but Sydney on average I think gets about 4 times the rainfall of Los Angeles, and they're not as common as they are sprinklers in California. Sydney can get rain year-round, so you don't need sprinklers as much. And Sydney's just had its wettest year ever in history.
And I do think that, to answer your question, John, there's an economic crisis. It's latent, but it's there. And it's not just about zero COVID, it's also about the demographics, which are dreadful. I mean, the population of China could halve between now and the end of the century, if you look at the worst case scenario in the UN population projections. And here's the thing we have to do.
It's to crack down on the tech sector.
The tech sector, which is one thing the party never really controlled, but it decided it was time to bring Jack to heel. But there's one thing we haven't talked about, although we touched on it briefly. Right at the heart of China's economy now is the real estate sector. And our friend Ken Rogoff has written very persuasively about this. And the real estate game, where the government would sell the land to the property developers, they would get a piece of the action, and they'd build tower blocks, and a huge percentage of economic activity was in fact building urban infrastructure. That's game over now.
And considered on future sales.
So you're building tower blocks for nobody.
The population's in decline.
Right. So
Well, now they're blowing them up, and
Of course they are.
Keynesian stimulus number 101: build a tower and blow it up.
But
That's
John,
the
but John
Soviet
did ask John did ask the most important question. Okay,
Yeah.
is it over, Stephen? Like now, what is?
So building towers and blowing them up reminds me of a story linked from the Drudge Report today that people are talking about that there's a lot of therapeutic benefit from digging a hole and then filling it back up. So have you guys experienced the great psychological blessings that come from digging a hole and then filling it back up again? That's not my idea of a good time. Like, I prefer to read a book, go for a swim, eat a mango. Just bought some mangoes for $3.90 each Australian. So that's the equivalent of what, about $2 American?
Now, what is your view of the near future?
Yeah, what do we close out with this? What are the next 5 years hold for China?
With the party trying to stay
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is a great show, but you're asking a historian who studies the past now to tell you to predict the future, the next 5 years? Is that normal for this show?
It's normal.
it can only be better than
I mean, it's a lot better than asking a social scientist. I'll tell you that. No offense to social scientists.
If I had a good read on...
So John says you need to go to the local fruit and veg market. That's where you get the best deals. I'm someone who likes a lot of familiarity in his life. Yeah, I got them from Woolies. Got my mangoes from Woolies. So I like to go the tried and true realm. I don't... a farmer's market is just too wild for me. Look, sell your activator on the last day or two. Help out Aussies with the secret goods.
Future, John, I think I would not be in this chair. I'd be in a different chair, which was a lot more comfortable and expensive. But anyway, I don't want to make it look like I'm trying to shirk my duty here and avoid your question. So this is the answer to your question. The extent to which you think the party is able to tolerate private sector wealth and independent power, you think that growth can come back. To the extent that you think the party is not going to tolerate that, they're not going to tolerate the job creation and GDP growth that the private sector provides. When they talk about you can establish a private company, but just don't get too big. That is a self-limiting, obviously, policy right there.
Alibaba.
And then, of course, there's...
So I'm very much a spur-of-the-moment kind of guy. So I got up Wednesday morning and just one or two things fell into place. And then suddenly it occurred to me, I want to be back in Sydney. And so within an hour of deciding I wanted to be back in Sydney, I'd already booked my flight. And I just waited around on pins and needles for 3 hours to hear back from where I was going to stay, if that was kosher, if I come and stay with them for a few months. And so yeah, just spur of the moment. So it reminds me, one Sabbath in March of 1984, or April of 1984, I suddenly got the idea, I want to go back to Australia for a year after high school and stay with my brother Paul. And it just like hit me, and I did it. I went back to Australia for a year after high school, and I worked at G.J. Coles, which is Kmart, the Australian version of Kmart. And that was so miserable. Like working at Kmart for 3.5 months, I'm just not cut out for that kind of thing. So miserable, it gave me great determination to go back to America and study hard at college. And I managed to then get one of the best jobs I've ever had, a cleaning contract at the Boyne Island Shopping Centre. So I did the gardening and the cleaning for about 7 months there. I got paid like $35 an hour Australian, which was like $30 American then at the time. So at age 18, like I was getting paid as much as I'd make at age 46. All right, at age 18 in Australia, just for cooking and gardening, right? I was getting paid as much as I'd earn between, say, age 44 and 50 in America. I was getting paid I was getting paid far more than at 18. Getting paid about $30 American at age 18 for this cleaning and gardening contract at the Boyne Island Shopping Centre. And I also got to read books for about 2 or 3 hours a day, in addition to the local newspaper, because I had a contract as my own boss. Then I went back to America, and I thought, no way I'd cut out for working at Kmart or, working in a grocery store. No way. I came back to America and I thought I was serious. I was just pulling B grades at Sierra Community College. Then I worked a winter landscaping, and that was so miserable that after that I got straight A's from then on. All right, and then I transferred to UCLA. It was a winter working landscaping that finally convinced me to get serious about my studies. So absolutely hated working at Kohl's and Kmart or any grocery store. That's not really my thing.
And then, of course, there's the expropriation that continues. He fights corruption of the people he doesn't like and enables the people who are on his side, his favorites, to acquire property and wealth. So if you think that they need the private sector like oxygen, can't give it up, and will be compelled by reality to indulge it going forward, you could potentially be somewhat optimistic about the Chinese growth model. If, however, you're persuaded...
Hey guys, I got a very delicate question. So I see a lot of women wearing very form-fitting tight shorts. I guess they're for workouts, and they're just completely tight across the crotch. And first of all, for women who have a paunch there, it's not a good look. So this is just my public service announcement, ladies. If you have a paunch, don't wear those skin tight, crotch emphasizing shorts. Is there a particular name? I asked people and they just said, oh, it's just workout clothing. But is it just because I'm a sex addict? I just see these shorts that seem to be, so tight around the crotch. It just seems to... I've never dated a Latina woman. I've never dated a Hispanic woman. I've never dated a Mexican. I did go out once. I took one Mexican woman. She was doing a master's degree. She was very highly educated and beautiful. And she'd call me from a bathtub when she was taking a bath. And it was weird. All I could talk to her was about Mexican things. I just kept wanting to talk to her about everything Mexican because it just seemed so weird. I just couldn't imagine actually dating a Mexican, so I only dated her once. And though she was beautiful and smart and educated, I just couldn't handle dating a Latina. And of course she wasn't Jewish, and so who needs the aggro? So anyway, what's the name for workout clothing that's just so tight around the crotch that it just seems to emphasize every fold, every bump, every hillock? Am I a pervert? Am I a bad man? That I keep noticing this? And why am I, looking? But it just my eyes just go, vroom. Why do women wear this clothing that is particularly tight and revealing around the crotch? And help me with questions of etiquette, what's the appropriate response? All right, so if you're wearing this kind of tight, revealing clothing around the crotch, are you crying out for compliments? So what would be the appropriate compliment? It's oh, you've got a really svelte crotch, or your crotch is looking good today, or looking pretty juicy, or nice vagina. What's the appropriate compliment to give to women who wear this really tight workout gear around the crotch and then walk up and down the streets while I'm trying to study Torah, while I'm trying to think about Torah, while I'm trying to stay with my emotional sobriety? No, I haven't catcalled women. I'm 56 years of age, and I don't think I didn't really do it when I was 18, because one, I can't whistle. I don't know how to whistle. But I need to know the proper etiquette. No, I'm in Los Angeles. My vote doesn't matter, right? What matters is that I study Torah and I stay emotionally sober, and that I learn the proper etiquette. What's the proper compliment, or are you just supposed to ignore it? Right? They're walking around flaunting their tight svelte crotches, and is the appropriate thing just to ignore it? I need to know. And if there's anyone who knows etiquette. It's the members of this channel who are some of the most refined people I've ever known. So tell me the proper etiquette. What's the right thing to say to a woman who's dressed this way?
About the Chinese growth model. If, however, you're persuaded that the Leninist system is for real, Xi Jinping is for real, on top of that, that the system selects for certain leaders. It's not the personality of the leader per se, it's the kind of person that again and again gets to the top of these systems to, as it were, defend the system against these. And then if you want to talk about the larger strategic environment.
So Media Hits wants to know why no one was commenting on the women doing squats while I was talking November 4. Well, the reason is that people come to this live stream for the profound ideas. People come here for the intellectual stimulation, not visceral physical stimulation. Like, people come here for the wit and the wisdom, for the emotional sobriety, for the moral uplift, all right? They don't come here for tawdry reasons.
They make a lot of enemies, and they make profound enemies out of people who want to be their friends. And then you talk about the strategic shift that happened in American policy under the general when he was the national security advisor.
No, Media Hits, I wasn't filming the women doing squats. I was filming Kuji. All right, tell her the clothes facilitate the Alexander technique, then introduce yourself. You'd like to be her Alexander teacher. Zero Hotties film, Luke serves up land whales early in this video, thanks. Look, I was filming Kuji. I was filming Sydney. I was filming God's creation. I was filming nature. I was filming seagulls. I was filming a wholesome scene. I don't know why Media Hits has to take it into the gutter. I mean, that's just not what I'm about, bro.
Under the general when he was the national security advisor, and Mike Pompeo was Secretary of State, and Matt Pottinger was the general's deputy. You want to talk about the fact that things are not going their way. But you're right, they think things are going their way.
Okay, so John Smith says he thinks Luke does not appreciate women who are a pound over skinny. Like, I don't objectify women, John Smith. I'm not like checking them out. I mean, what's a pound here? What matters is what's on the inside. All right, what matters is their moral character, their intellectual stimulation, the wisdom that they've accumulated along with the wrinkles and the added pounds over the years. Nice Ethan Ralph gut. That's Luke's catcall. God forbid, God forbid. I'm looking for a woman, my age who will stand up to me, who will put me in a place, who has learned so much over her 5+ decades of life. Like, what do I need with some teeny bopper 18, 22-year-old when I could be with a strong, independent woman my own age who's not afraid to call me out for my nonsense? Right? There's a lot of wisdom that comes with age, not just wrinkles.
But you're right, they think things are going their way. And so that is potentially the most important answer to your question.
But the Russians thought things were going their way for 70 years until all of a sudden they weren't.
But my point being is that if they're persuaded that they're in the right by strangling the private sector and acting aggressively abroad, and that this is working for them, and if they're persuaded they're in the right, it's likely they'll continue those kind of policies, in which case the answer to your question is look over your portfolio one more time for China exposure.
Okay, guys, look over your portfolio at least one more time for China exposure. I'm going to continue on with my walk to Bondi. That's where the Jews are. G'day mate, 40 here. Welcome to Bronte Beach. On the way from Coogee through Clovelly to Bronte, and we'll go to Modelrama, otherwise known as Tamarama Beach, where the models used to hang out. Then we'll go all the way to Bondi, the burning core of Orthodox Judaism in Sydney. Anyway, I've been listening on my walk. I subscribe to Apple News Plus. I've been listening on my walk to a Time magazine cover story on who is Kerry Lake. who seems likely to win governor in Arizona. And the turning point in her life apparently was in December of 2020. She went to church. She started going to a new evangelical Christian church, a Bible church. Previously she'd been Catholic. And the pastor preached that what you do for work is important, but don't let it change you. I'm just thinking, how naive and silly is that? Like, a lot of the pious things that clergy intone in their sermons, right, sound good. And sermons are supposed to be all about edification, right? But that which sounds edifying, that which sounds pious, and that which sounds uplifting is frequently nonsense. And this is an example of absolute nonsense. Of course, your job is going to change who you are. It can't help but change who you are. Everything you do affects you. Like, how you spend your time affects you. What you do for a living affects you. Whether you're a landscape architect, or a home architect, or a clerk at Kmart, or a rabbi, or an accountant, it affects you. From my years working in landscaping, I've never looked at landscaping the same. I always start looking at how it's going to drain. How's the water going to drain out of this place? Then working for years as a journalist, it affects you. You start thinking about who, what, when, where, why. I'm very good if you ask me about who, what, when, why questions. What was I doing during a particular week or month in my life? And my background in journalism has well equipped me for asking who, what, when, where, why questions. Lawyers, right? Their work trains them to think in terms of evidence and in terms of constructing a narrative. So there was a history professor, a Marxist history professor, who wrote this highly acclaimed book, but the book was taken apart by another history professor who showed he used really shoddy research techniques. He used really shoddy supporting evidence in his book. That his book really was a tendentious lawyer's brief masquerading as a work of history. And so this critical history professor made it his mission to drum this other history professor out of the profession. And so when this tendentious history professor, Marxist, got drummed out of the history profession, where did he go? He became a lawyer, right? He was much better suited for arguing a case in his briefs. So yeah, the helicopters come by the beaches regularly. So as I was checking out from Woolies today, the checkout clerk said there are a lot of sharks out there. So apparently all the recent rains flooded into the ocean, bringing lots of delicious things to eat. And the sharks have become attracted to that. And so maybe the sharks are getting closer inland. So about 3 miles south of here, some dude was eaten and killed by a shark just after I left last year. Apparently he was in a wetsuit, and the thinking is that the shark confused him for a seal and made a meal out of him. Haven't seen any sharks yet, but it did take me aback having the checkout clerk lady at Woolies say, lots of sharks out there. So everything you do affects you. Like the news you watch, the YouTube streams you watch, the podcasts you listen to. So I hold that they affect you, but on the other hand, I don't hold by the conventional mainstream perspective of the zombie bite theory of information, that if you just get exposed to a particular podcast or a book or an article or a Twitter account, that's just going to turn you into a zombie. These accounts just going to get their fangs into you and infect you with their misinformation and radicalize you. No one gets radicalized without their consent, right? If you're buying into someone's social media lies, right, that's a consensual act. Wow, 3 helicopters have just come by. I wonder what's going on. That's unusual. Normally you see about 1 helicopter every couple of hours. Now we've had 3 in 5 minutes. So yeah, if you're getting radicalized online, that's a consensual act. Getting radicalized by a book, all right? You read Kevin McDonald's Cultural Critique and you quit your $120,000 a year job like Patrick Little, right? That's consensual. You consented. The authorities have been alerted that Luke Ford is spreading misinformation online, and so they're sending out helicopters. So I don't buy the zombie bite theory of information. On the other hand, I don't believe that the online world is completely separate from the real world. And I don't believe that the things that you do and the things that you listen to should have no effect on you. Of course they're going to have an effect, right? A good way of getting a bead on who you are is to look at who your 3 closest friends are. It's going to provide a pretty good reflection of who you are. And what you listen to does affect you, but it doesn't transform you without your consent. So if someone in your life is continually telling you lies, you're consenting to that. You may not be cognizant of it, but we are evolutionarily designed to be extremely good at detecting and disarming when other people are trying to manipulate us. If we weren't good at detecting when other people try to manipulate us, we'd be dead. We wouldn't be alive as a species. Right? We are not evolutionarily adapted to be gullible. We did not evolve to be gullible. So it's extremely hard to manipulate other people. Well, it's extremely easy to fool yourself in any direction you want to go. What are all these helicopters doing? All these helicopters over Bondi, is it because I'm putting out misinformation? The world famous Bondi Beach, mate.